just as a quick little caption here, our fearless leader, Michelle, is on vacation this week. And then we're going to be doing a bit of a Scrum Master transition closer to the end of the month. So unfortunately, you're stuck with myself and Alys for today.
We're lucky to have you, Andrew.
Well, thank you very much, Caitlin. So just as a reminder, this meeting is being recorded and will go up on our YouTube channel, so behave as best you can. So just a quick little update here. We do have some new folks on our team, and unfortunately, Root also is no longer with us here. We have a new developer, Henry, and a new UX specialist, Katrina, who we'll introduce in a moment. We are also finished Sprint 22, and we started our Sprint 23 last week. This demo was just pushed a week later because things didn't line up very well, everyone coming off vacation. So our next demo is on the 26th, 2 weeks from today. Starting off Sprint 22, sprint missed goals here. We were quite the skeleton crew over Christmas, but we didn't fully stop. On the developer technical setup side, we created our part-time assessment, just the structure and starting to work through the assessment rules. Institution side, edit program info during COE, another business rule there. View denied reason on PIR, that was a bug we actually had. Ministry user adds, views, resolves a student restriction. Alys will be going over that in a second. UX admin side, government design system Figma, we'll be showing you that today as well. And on the analysis team, aka Lisa, our first draft of some UAT test scenarios, which we'll be going over again briefly. Over to you, Alys.
Thanks. So just I know folks have been anxious about all of the ministry user functionality, so we're continuing to finish up the institution and student side of things, and a lot of emphasis right now on the ministry user functionality. So of course, in addition to being able to see information in order to support institutions and students, there's three kind of primary areas of function. So ministry users are going to be able to add, view, or resolve a restriction. And I shouldn't just say student restriction there, it should say student and institution, but we're going to show you the student restriction side today. Ministry users need to be able to approve or deny changes, which is essentially that new process which is going to replace Appendix 7. And of course, we have adjudicators that need to continue to approve exceptions to policy, which we currently call an override. So for example, if the program doesn't meet the validations, but we decide to give an exception, they need to be able to move the program into approved status. The same thing with some of the front-end appeals requests that are now going to come in through the application. Ministry users are going to need to be able to approve an exception so that the application can continue. We're not going to show you that today, but those are the primary functions there. Lisa completed the UAT planning over Sprint Miss, and UAT has started, but she's going to show us some high-level overview of what's going to happen, what's already starting to happen. And then we have created a feedback mural as well as a feedback spreadsheet, because we're moving into the area now where you're going to have a lot of opportunity to maybe participate. Some of the team leads are accessing the test environment, so they may have different meetings with you. You may be asked for feedback, so we're going to make sure that we have a means to track all of your feedback and report back to you whether or not something's changing as a result, or whether that's going into the backlog, or whether we're not changing, and here's why. We've also got all of our the videos that Katie has done, the mod moments that are up on the YouTube channel. Of course, there's going to be some that need to be re-recorded, but just would encourage folks to go there until we get you access to the practice environment. And my usual reminder, you're still going to see some text on here, which may say things like, "Ooh, something good should be said here." We've started to identify resources for who's going to help us go in and start to update and clean up any of those text pieces, make sure they meet with government standards. You're going to see us continuing to reuse, and we'll give you some examples of that today as it relates to restrictions, but reusing processes. And just a reminder that we keep talking about June. June is the MVP, not the final product. So we're just beginning this journey. And of course, we have a plan for the next phase. So a whole bunch of other functionality to be built in.
It's tea caffeinated though, just so.
Okay, someone's got decaf.
Just because it was
so
the morning, but I didn't end up making coffee this morning.
Darren, we hear you. Okay. So phase 2 is planned for the fall. So just a reminder that this is the beginning of the journey, not the end. So that's my business context for now. Let's jump into the good stuff.
Perfect. I did post the feedback you'll hear that Robin did post in the chat. I will fix it so it doesn't look like that afterwards. So if you go back and look for it, you will see it there. Just as a reminder, if you have your mic open,
why would they need a
please
fund
mute
to just fire Fauci?
Just give me 1 second. Okay, I muted everyone but myself, but perfect. So to throw you on the spot here, Katrina, maybe do you want to introduce yourself? Just a quick 30 seconds. I didn't tell you I was going to do this, but surprise.
No worries, no pressure. Hi everyone, very nice to meet you all. I'm Katrina, so I'm joining the team here as a UX designer. Very excited to be on the project. Little background about myself. I studied design at Emily Carr, and yeah, have been working in the UX UI field ever since. And yeah, something that I'm really passionate about. So once again, just really excited to be part of the team here. Thanks so much.
Perfect. And Henry, I'm not sure if you're on the line.
I am.
Perfect. Do you want to give a 30-second introduction?
Oh, yes. Morning, everyone. Happy to meet everyone here. My name is Henry, developer from AOT. Happy to be on this project, and because of the impact and the positive impact it will make on the citizens. Been a developer for quite some time, a little over 15 years. I worked with various technologies as well. I'm hoping definitely looking forward to contributing my skill set to ensure the success of this project. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Henry. So I'm going to pass the mic over to Guru, who's just going to give you a bit of an overview of some of the part-time assessment work we've been done. It's not finished yet. We're going to be working on it for the next little bit here, just as a high level.
Thanks, Shankar. I'll just grab the screen.
Yeah.
Hello, team. Yeah, yes, team, you might have remembered, on submitting of an student application, when a student submits an application, so it will go to a set of workflows where the assessment will be calculated and the awards for the students will be calculated. So we have till now designed for full-time offering intensity, but now we have enabled the part-time offering intensity. So that was the part of my change, which I was doing it during your holidays and stuff. So here, I have a sample application which I have pre-filled it. So if you see a program here, this is a part-time program, and you have all this information defined here. You have a family information, financial information, and also the confirmation of submission. So what eventually on submit of application happens is it will go through this workflow. So this workflow was already designed, but eventually when it comes to calculate the assessment and calculate the award, previously it was only defined only for full time. But right now we have enabled it for part time. So previously it was just hard coded values, but now we have kind of you can just think of it as a 4x4, or a kind of a squared inputs. Like when you input a program here with the type of offering intensity, it will give you an output. What is the workflow it has to call? Either it has to call a part-time workflow, or it has to call a full-time workflow. So for example, you can see this difference, right? These are full-time workflows and these are part-time workflows, assessment workflows. And for awards, it will go the similar way for part-time, and this is for the full-time gateways. Okay, so in a way, like we can dynamically select a workflow itself with respect to the input what you are giving. So yeah, that is what it is. And we have designed the whole calculation. So for example, previously we do have this Excel sheet, the sheet which calculates the part-time award assessment configurations and also the award configuration. So when you input some data, the actual calculated output will be here, the manual output will be here, and the actuals what it has to be awarded to the student will be shown here. So the kind of financial need and stuff like that. So for ease of the demo purposes, I have pre-filled all these data. So for example, if you see like this particular program has a kind of a 30-week study and a course load of 50, and it's not an online program which has some tuition fees, school fees included in it with books, fees, stuff like that. So these two calculations will be dynamically done even if you are not giving any values over here. So even if you give something, it will not be taken care. So those calculations are done completely using this. Oh wait, not that. Okay, this whole workflow which we designed it. So for example, you might have seen it similar to the Excel sheet, like you see a tuition cost here, you see a tuition cost here, a school fees, a books and supplies fees, book fees, school fees, transportation. So the whole summed up value will be a total academic expenses. The sum value here, you see it. The same way we are calculating the dependence cost if they are an actual dependent, even if they are older than 12 years of age. So those kind of calculation, we all do it here in the workflow. So, and the total expenses is calculated. So we can just see this in action, okay, how it actually works. So I'm just submitting this application right now. Let me do it. Just submitting this application. So eventually, this is our dev OpenShift Commander server. So right now you're seeing only one instance out of it. I can do this now. Okay, let me check that. A minute. Yeah, the actual assessment workflow ID was 9376. Okay, 9376. So this was that recent one. 801 was the application ID which we submitted right now. And if you see, like I have shown you that 4x4, I mean that kind of an table, right, which selects it dynamically. So you can see like the assessment workflow it has to select was calculate PT assessment, not the calculate assessment. So for a full time, this is a sample example for a full time. You see the definition key was just calculate assessment previously in our previous workflows, but currently we are having it properly as a JSON file. And so just sum things up. Okay, I'll just show you the total academic expenses which was calculated dynamically here with respect to the values what we are having here. This is 778563. The same is actually calculated here, 778563. And you remember, like I have told you, like the transportation cost is being calculated with respect to the we have a table to calculate it. So those tables we are just having it here, and we are calculating the transportation cost as 390, and the same has been calculated here too. The same way the other values, the school fees is 56. So these are just for your example, I have given some random values. These are not actual values. Just I mean, whatever you give here, whatever you change here, it will be calculated the numbers over here. And the actual assessment needed is 778563. So you can see that the total financial need, we have different naming conventions, but when you're showing it back in the UI, it will be the same what you see it in the Excel sheet, or I mean with respect to what the team is really needing it. So yeah, 778563. So I mean overall, what we are planning to do is like we even started with our configurations, but we can just wait for it at least for now. So the thing what we have done is previously the part-time assessment was never calculated and we did not have it. Right now we have it and we have it working. This small box actually corresponds to all these gateways and all these calculations which are happening at the background. So yeah.
Perfect. Thank you, Guru. Just in some different, even higher level words, basically what that means is since we're reusing the functionality and the structure of how everything works, basically what Guru did is the application going through, collecting information that's needed, just going through, calculate it if it's full-time intensity, and then you have an output. All that's happening is that if it's full-time, it's taking like a parallel course just for the assess need and the awards, and then going back to the same path. So everything else is the same, just for that little section where it's doing all the math and the awards and the config, it's taking a separate path with different values and calculations and coming back.
So Andrew, that means then that when the student applies and they give us all the information, we can apply the right rules to determine whether they are getting, how much funding they're getting awarded for part-time or how much for full-time, and that will show up correctly on the notice of assessment.
Exactly. Since like all that application work we did originally, everything was aligned for this reason, that everything looks the same, just you get different math and different awards.
Yeah, so it's a big deal. It's quite a big milestone. So so obviously we'll be, and of course there'll need to be some testing, which Lisa will tell us a little bit more about that down the road. But we've now got it built so that we can complete full-time or part-time applications and get the right numbers at the end.
Yeah, and just as Guru said, he was just picking numbers. It's not necessarily real, real examples.
Sorry to interrupt. Like I got a like Stephen, you just asked like how the system identify the course load, I guess, right? The 20 to 39% and the 42 to 59%, right? So currently we have it like we are not calculating it right now. We just have a hard-coded value of 50%. Eventually, when we get the actual requirements of how to calculate it, we'll include it in the actual calculations. So I mean that is the only value we are hard coding it, and you asked it right.
Perfect. So moving on to restrictions next, I'm going to give just a quick 2-minute background on restrictions, and then Dheepak's going to show you the UI and walk through how it works. So just as a bit of a recap, there's 2 main types of restrictions. There's the federal restrictions and the provincial restrictions. Federal restrictions come through the system via the integration with our federal partners, meaning that adding and removing restrictions and everything comes from that file and that integration. Provincial ones, on the other hand, are managed through our system. So restrictions of type provincial, there was a lot of work done about breaking them down into specific categories about things like for verification, academic, and so on and so on. You'll see the list when we get to the UI. So federal restrictions, that was shown last sprint demo, I believe, possibly the one before, about how the file works. You will see them still in the same UI, but that's how they come in. Provincial ones are the ones adding and removing in the UI there. Just gonna have a look at my note to see if there was anything else. Oh, the one other point was we're just going to show you the student one right now. The institution ones do work basically the exact same way, and we're reusing almost everything we can. Just there's a different type, which you'll see that next demo. So Dheepak, if you're ready, if you want to go ahead and walk through, and then.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. I'll grab the screen. Hi team. So basically the introduction is going to be, as Andrew mentioned, we are going to talk about, we are going to see that a student can get a federal as well as a provincial restriction. The way how it happens is, as Andrew mentioned, the federal restrictions come through a the file which is sent from the feds, and provincial restrictions are managed by our system. So let me get into them, and we are going to search for students to see who has a restriction. So we are going to view all these things first before we know how to create and resolve them. So when a student has a restriction to start with, when a ministry user views, then there will be an indicator that, hey, this student has an active restriction there. So then click on the restrictions tab when you want to view the restrictions. So to start with, if you see, we have an active federal and a provincial restriction, and to categorize them, all the provincial restriction would have a category to them. Unlikely the federal has a standard category, which is called as federal. But the provincial ones have a list of categories, which we'll be seeing it shortly. And even though the federal restrictions comes from the file for a student, and we process that in a nightly job, we still made sure that that should be at least viewable by a ministry user on what kind of restriction got assigned and on which date and so and so. So I'm going to start with viewing a federal restriction here. So it will be a very crisp information saying like, what is the category which is federal is for federal. So and what is the type of description of the restriction and what's the status of it and when the user got assigned to it. This is how it looks. So I'm going to click on cancel. Unlikely, if you're going to see a provincial restriction which is outstanding or active, so it's going to have more information like it'll have the category which is academic, and it shall have a reason or a description and who created it, and on what date it is created, who created it, and what's the note that they mentioned while adding this restriction. And if at all the ministry user feels that they have to resolve this because they have the sufficient information or they have to resolve it, yes, we have a way that you can resolve it by entering your resolution notes and clicking on resolve. I'm gonna do the resolve in some time after going through how does it look when you view a resolved restriction, which is a provincial. So when I go here and see, as I mentioned, the restriction details of who created it, what was the notes while it was created. And if you resolve it, it's going to look like this. The resolution reason and who resolved it again, the person who might be resolving it may be different on a different date. So these things are captured here. So I'm going to click on cancel. To view the resolve and add of restriction, I'm going to take you to a different student for the purpose of data because this has a lot of chunk data to it. I'm going to take you to a different student for that purpose. Here we go. This, and also there is one more thing about federal restrictions. I didn't tell you how it looks like when it resolved, because this gets resolved if the federal file doesn't have the student's entry in the next batch or any of the consecutive batches further. And we won't be having resolved by because it's system, but it'll be having resolved date to it and status and stuff. We'll add a provincial restriction as a ministry user now. So I'm going to take one of the categories like academic. And if you see for every category, you will get a list of provincial restrictions what we have. So it's totally based on like if you want to see an appeal, and you will have a list where just one. But if you go to academic, likewise, you will have the restrictions which are related to academic. I'm going to add a restriction and click on add. So you see that I have an active restriction here. So added on Jan 12th today, and I'm going to do a little refresh and see that the badge of the user changes because this student is now having an active restriction. And I'm going to resolve the same now by clicking on the view. I feel that this user has done everything now. So resolve. click on this, so it's resolved, and it's, if you see the note of it, they're all captured, adding a restriction and resolving restriction. And to complete this, we have this note section, which was, I think, which we remember demonstrating it the previous demos. So when you go to the notes, if you see that these restriction notes are automatically captured in the note section. So if they want to know a history of what happened to a student in terms of restriction, they just can come here and view the timeline of what has happened. So that is all with the student restriction, but I'm going to show you one more thing. I'm going to add one more restriction, say appeal. Which is for the student, and I am going to show you how the student login looks if they have an active restriction to them. So going here. Just give me a moment. I'm going to grab the screen and bring it for you. Profile. You can see the name of the user matching with what we had there. And it would say that you have a hold on it. Please contact SABC to resolve, which is pertaining to provincial restriction. If they have a federal restriction, the message would be accordingly different. And they cannot start a new application. They cannot edit or delete or anything to do with their application. It is there in every page when they go, and their login just remains kind of stale, or they can just view. They cannot modify anything unless they get their restriction resolved. This is one of the things which we have done already, but to make it more sense, we're just showing that when we have the restrictions in place. And also, as Andrew mentioned, the same thing is going to happen for the institution as well. We'll be able to add and resolve and view restrictions to it. So from a component, from the development perspective, these components are going to be common. The framework has been built once, and they're going to be used across anything which needs a restriction. Yeah, and that's everything from me. And over to you, Andrew.
Perfect. Thank you, Dheepak. So we're just going to keep going. I have been capturing the questions as much as possible in the chat to review at the end. I won't share the screen. I'll just pass the mic over to you, Lynn, who's been working on the design system.
Awesome. Thank you, Andrew. So, hi, everyone. We're at the stage now where we are hardening our UX and UI standards. So today I'm going to show you the design system where it lives in. We have a really good foundation for students, staff, and schools now, and we're at a good stage where we can start to reuse components because we're starting to see patterns and similar needs shared between our users. So, for example, what we built and designed for institutions, now we can reuse on the staff side as well. So today I'm going to walk you through our StudentAid BC design system. Looks something like this, and I won't zoom in quite yet, but what is a design system? It's where we store a collection of reusable components guided by clear standards that can be assembled together to build any number of applications. And this is going to really help us design and also build faster. So in order to quickly iterate with confidence, our design team needs to access a single source of truth, and this is it. And that allows for us to that allows for a scalable UI language and a streamlined UX guideline. So with our touch points like StudentAid BC touch points reaching over many applications, and also in the future, our StudentAid BC website. This will provide us a consistent user experience, which can be assisted by leveraging central design systems such as this here. So just a note as well, our design systems are always evolving as well, and the way we share and encourage our adoption of new iterations will evolve along the way, and this will be based on the user needs, kind of run by user research as well, right? So We had mentioned a lot about common components, and if you have a question of what are common components are things like colors, our colors here. So we have our brand colors. We have something called our semantic colors too, and semantic colors are kind of like traffic lights, right? Red, yeah, orange, green, right? Don't go, warning, and success kind of thing, right? So we have our semantic colors, our accent colors, our borders, backgrounds, and our whites, things like that. Our typography, which is really good for accessibility on that lens as well, just really outlining clear guidelines so also the developers can use it and kind of put that into the work as well. We have our buttons and icons and banners. We have our form elements, which is the majority of our design on an atomic level, right? So we got all these fields here that we're starting to now kind of standardize. We have our cards, badges, et cetera, et cetera. We also have our illustrations that I want to show you here as well. We're using a really friendly style just to kind of make the design a little bit more pleasant to look at. And then going down, you know, we have our key pieces of our layout, which is the navigation. This is a really key point for our user experience, right? The navigation. So we have the student, institution, ministry, and our side navigations for each of the users. So that's just in a nutshell what our design system is. You always have access to this. Anyone from Student ABC should have the link. It is posted on the mural if you want to take a look at it. If the goal here is that this will be utilized across all of StudentAid BC's products, so our applications and future proofing for the StudentAid BC website as well in the future. So if we make a change to the design, the goal is that we make a change to all of our products in terms of the experience or the UI. So this is kind of where we're starting it off. So allowing for that consistency. Effectively reducing build time for developers as well, reusing components where it makes sense, where the needs are similar and where we can share that too, right? And ultimately saving business costs and potential code refactoring. So it has benefits to all these different areas within our team here. So promoting consistency across our products, reducing build time, allowing room for innovation, especially when needs change, and being maintenance friendly as well, right? So we have, it's going to be maintenance friendly across all of our products. And then also for the users, it contributes to a strong and memorable brand for users, right? We need to get to that point. And also reusing components keeps the experience familiar with our users. So they're not having to relearn an interface or relearning how to do a specific process. So that's kind of great for the users as well. And again, it really helps us provide those guidelines for us. So we're at a really good stage right now, I would say. So we're going to continue to grow that, and yeah, really excited to see where we end up with this. So, and that's it for the design system.
Perfect. Thank you, Lynn. Next up, I'm going to pass it over to Lisa here, who's going to give us a bit of a high level through some of the UAT plan. We did go over it just before Christmas, but if you're able to, Lisa, just give a level snapshot again of the UAT process.
Sure.
I can share if you like.
No, that's okay. I'm just sharing the user scenarios that we've started with. We've started with testing the Institute users because they are the ones that will be using it in production first. And just a really high level look at the scenarios. The scenarios were built on the user stories that the different business areas came up with during meetings. So we'll be looking at login and profile information. So authenticating login and then also being able to view the BCEID profile information. Managing the institution, basically viewing their details, editing institution locations and the institution users. Program information, creating and editing programs, seeing the status of programs, and editing offerings. Looking at program information requests when they're a regular one and also program information requests with no study period, and then on to confirmation of enrollment, and of course logging off. Testers that are working with me are really experienced in the business. So shout out to Tatiana and Nikki. And Danielle also gets a lot of, is my other tester. She also gets a lot of feedback from students from Twitter, which has been really useful in sort of informing a different angle to testing that I may not have thought of. This is the testing workflow, and hopefully everybody can see this. I'll just. I provide the test cases to the testers who then perform the tests. They're tracking their results on spreadsheets, and also Nikki and Tatiana have been giving me updates every day. I'm taking those test results and creating a list of bugs and issues. And if it's a new bug and issue, I provide a list of these for discussion with Andrew and Alys. We look at these. Andrew is able to provide technical feedback and give us an idea of time estimates to remediate, whether it's a real bug or something that will be rectified later on, and also the impact. What else is going to be affected if we change it? And Alys decides whether we're going to fix it, defer it, whether it's not part of the minimum viable product, and also prioritizing those fixes. Then they get logged in Zen Hub. Developers can then pick these up and resolve those issues, and then are continuing to work on it if it's not fixed. Once it is fixed, they would assign it back to the test coordinator, which is myself, and I let the test team know to go back in there and test it again to make sure that it's been resolved. If it's not resolved, it goes through this whole process again. Once it's fixed, then we basically close that ticket as resolved. At the end of this as well, feature owners will be given a overview of all the testing that's been done and the results of that testing, so that they can, make sure that the requirements that were set out have been covered off, and that it's resolved to their satisfaction. That's basically everything with testing.
Thanks, Lisa. I just wanted to flag as well that as much as I'm responsible for some of these pieces, just want to let you know that I'm absolutely doing that in collaboration with the feature owners. So asking them, and then I'm the conduit there. So promise you, I'm not out on doing rogue, doing that in consultation with the business.
Perfect. Thanks there, Alys. There's a copy of the workflow here if you need. I should be sharing my screen again. Looking at our Sprint 23 here, just before we move to questions.
Sure.
Award eligibility rules. That's what I was mentioning at the beginning, just expanding on the part-time, full-time award config. SFAST file integration. This is part of the transition plan to make sure we have everything we need at SIMS for students. This is things like application dates, previous application dates, awards. We just have an update to do there. Application overlap check. As you all have probably seen, there's a lot of applications for a couple students. Obviously, that wouldn't be the case going live. Particularly, we've left this one down a little bit just for developing purposes. As you can imagine, once we have application overlap checks in, certain things become more difficult. Document number creation, just a little tweak there as well. Main development, institution user administrator adds legal authorized authority to any, I missed a word, any institution. Students, SIN validation timing, as you recall right now, once you've created your account, we're going to be validating your SIN. Right now, you can go ahead and do anything you want during that time. This is going to just be enhancing the UI to make sure you can't do that and you get the correct messaging. Ministry user adds, views, resolves an institution restriction. Kind of saw a sneak peek of it today because it's going to be very, very similar. On the UX side, launch accessibility audit, welcome page content. As I'm sure you guys have noticed as well, the welcome page is mostly just filled text right now, template text. request to change to program study period offerings, solution for second confirmation enrollment, design process, designation process, student welcome page content again, ministry user viewing all the programs and study period offering details, designation details, parent and partner applications that are attached to an application. As you see, there's a lot around these two areas right now, just because getting programs and stuff in generally comes first. Analysis side, continuing UAT testing is going to be the big one there. Anything to add there, Alys, before we go to questions? Nope.
No, just a reminder that we're already a week in to this sprint 23. So we'll have a demo in 2 weeks, and then we'll be back on our regular 3-week cycle. So we're already building some of these things, and some of them are already done, but we will include it in the next demo so we get back on cycle. So we've got a bunch of questions. Some of them I think have been answered and some not. So let's jump into those. So the first question, which is around how the system, so you'll recall Guru showed us the part-time assessment. So how is the system going to know that it's 20 to 39 or 40 to 59? Actually, while we were doing the demo, I was frantically trying to get in because I was trying to figure out the answer to this. But I do recall that we actually asked during a PIR, and of course, PIR being the program information request, which we anticipate will be required for most part-time applications, because we don't anticipate that institutions will create offerings for all of the part-time program, just because there's such a vast array of part-time offerings. And so I believe the institution will actually be telling us the percentage in the PIR. Am I right, Andrew, or am I telling a fib?
So we have the part-time versus full-time in the offering intensity, but we are missing the actual course load field itself, because there's one calculation, I believe, for part-time that is between these numbers, as was mentioned. So we do need to add that field, yes.
Right. So we're aware of that, and it's in our backlog. So we don't have a solution for that yet, but we're aware that we need to do that. And how we're going to do that is we anticipate through that PIR process, because we need to be told. The system has to be told how part-time are they, what percentage, and we're going to get that information from the institution. So that'll be on that PIR area.
I did also see just on that, someone mentioned there's more than one spot in the part-time calculation. There very well could be. We saw one of them, and then we know we needed it, so.
Okay, and thank you, good catch. So for folks that aren't aware, CSLP has changed their name just to make our life really fun. They're now the Canada Student Financial Aid. So we need to now go back through the system. Maybe Lynn, if you could capture that for our content person, we need to go back through the system and make sure that we refer to CSFA. So thank you for reminding us of that. So the actual restriction code, I think what you're referring to there is that under the reason, we have talked about the reason code, which is available for selection by the ministry user, is actually a concatenation of the code with the description that we get. So that's the plan. I noticed though, Harry, that there was 2 places where we showed it, and in one place we showed it, and the other place didn't have the concatenation. So I made a note of that as well. But the goal here is that the reason would be a concatenation. So that's just a fancy word for smushing 2 things together. So for example, if the reason code is B2, and then a narrative description of what B2 means, is that would be the reason, so that ministry users would see the code. And just a reminder that the code is only a 2-letter code. It's not the code that SFAS, which added C, I believe, to the beginning of it. So we may need to give you a little bit of a cheat sheet as to what those codes are, although you could probably give it to us. We have that in our restriction spreadsheet, which was developed by Josh and Jeremy with considerable contributions from Wade. So I hope that answers that. Will schools continue to be able to view the restrictions? That's a good question. I went through and was looking for where is the institution user views restrictions. So haven't seen that, but I did just add that to the list because we know that they might need to see restrictions. So if a restriction gets resolved, will the system remember that resolution if the same student application? I'm going to try to answer this one, and then Andrew, correct me technically if I get it wrong. So how we've designed the system is that if there is an active restriction, then that suspends the processing of the application. So funds won't be dispersed, things can't move forward. If that application, or pardon me, if that restriction then gets resolved, then that suspension is removed. So the application, if it's reassessed and if that restriction is not active, it won't stop that application from moving forward. Did I explain it correctly technically, Andrew?
I think so. Yep. The biggest thing there is, as you saw in the demo, we have a couple users with a whole bunch of restrictions. All those restrictions basically being turned on or turned off. The dates by who are captured for both, as well as the reason. And you could have one restriction turned on or off right now 100 times. And the audit tracking basically through all of them will be there.
Yeah, so if there is an active restriction at the time of reassessment, it will stop the process. If that restriction has been resolved, it will allow the process to go forward. Someone has a question. Phil, follow-up question to that.
Yeah, so that was mine. Sort of the reason why I asked that question was kind of like what we do now. Would we put a restriction on a school for whatever reason we want to monitor them for some kind of compliance issue? What happens is a student makes an application to that school and it automatically puts a restriction on the student application. When we go in then and we go in to resolve that restriction, we say, okay, well, it's resolved. We know that what it is, we're allowing this app to go through. It's good to go. And then what previously used to happen after we resolve the restrictions, anytime that student gets reassessed, the system would look at that school again, see that there's a restriction there, would automatically filter to the application again, and we would have to continually resolve those. But what we implemented sort of maybe about a year ago is to say to the system, we know there's a restriction here. We're allowing the student app to go through. So if it gets reassessed, let's ignore that institution restriction so that that student application doesn't get stopped every time it gets reassessed. And so that's where I'm coming from with this question.
Okay. So I think the answer then is that if there is an active restriction, then yes, it will stop the reassessment. So we'll have to talk about that because we have not built a complexity there for sure for MVP. So we could talk about that because right now, if there's a restriction, then things get suspended. If there is not an active restriction, then things move along. So you're describing a little bit of a complexity, which we have definitely not anticipated for MVP.
Okay.
Wade, did you have a follow-up on that?
Yeah, I did. Thanks. Just so what Phil's referring to there specifically is the D restriction, and then what we have is the IG, the ignore D. So in the spreadsheet that I was in the spreadsheet that I was helping Jeremy and Josh with, this falls under the category of what we called an override restriction. So it's really the same sort of thing as like the SNOV, where we're overriding the SIM check, or the whatever the other codes are, which aren't coming to my head right now. So the IGND. So it's essentially it's a restriction, but it's an override code that lives with the restriction. So so I just wanted to make sure that context was in there because I was understanding that actually has been part of the conversations for the MVP.
I think, are you talking about what I think we might have referred to as temporarily suspend instead of permanently suspend, right? We just want to suspend it for a moment in time.
Possibly. Okay. It's I don't know that it's, I mean, it's applications, it's definitely something that's application specific. So in terms of temporary in terms of a moment in time, I'm not so sure. Temporary in terms of applies to this application only and not the student's entire file. Yes. Okay. So for example, so in this case, if I'm applying, a student has this application for, you know, January to April. The school has a D restriction, and that D restriction is followed over onto the application, and it's messing up this application. I apply the ignore the D restriction, you know, override restriction code, right? Current day language, of course, and that instructs this application to ignore the D restriction, but the student submits a new application. That, and you know, that code, that override code doesn't go away, but it's specific only to the previous application. Student submits a new application, and that the D that belongs to the school drops right back onto the new application again. Okay, so I'm going to suggest to you that no, that is not what we have built for MVP, because that's getting to a much more complex, mature state that we're just not at. So let's make sure that we have a follow-up conversation specifically with Jeremy and Wade and team about how do we manage those. And of course, there's both sides of that. There's the institution restriction and there's the student side. So let's make sure we get the right folks to have a conversation, because it sounds as though it might be a change to our existing business process as a result of MVP. Yeah, and just to be clear, it's not just the D, like there are other sort of override codes that we use. The funding past end date, on the off time. I know we're decreasing on this massively and hoping to eliminate it, but the off time, the periodic time we need to do a SIN check override, or the periodic time we need to do a credit check override, that sort of thing. It's because mechanically it's the same function. Yeah. Okay. Let's. So yeah, okay, we need to walk that through, because I don't feel like we've quite sorted that out yet. But yeah. Sorry. Is there another hand up follow up on that, or is that good?
Yeah, it's just me, Alys, Josh.
Yeah.
So,
I had a different question what you put in text, but I'll just wait until it's that time. Okay.
Sure.
Hey, Josh.
Yeah. And I think what you're describing there about those temporary overrides is somewhat what Wade's referring to, where we had override codes to the block. I think the main concern and the conversation here is revolving around the fact that there are times federally or provincially where there's restrictions that will block an account, where we will bypass, whether there's certain ones where you'll enter an end date, or we'll have the permission to bypass that restriction, but it is an account restriction, whereas we are bypassing it for that specific app. And if that functionality is not there in MVP, that's fine. But yeah, that's definitely something that we need to look at moving forward. I think we need to go through and probably map that out from a process perspective to just make sure, because we know that the system won't have some of the complex functionality that it has now. So let's map it out and talk about that for sure. Okay, thanks. That's the federal restrictions. Like currently, we can't remove a federal restriction, but we will sometimes temporarily deactivate it. We've spoken with someone at SysFap. We're not supposed to call them that, but it's amusing. We've spoken with someone and they've confirmed, yep, that restriction is being removed. We're just waiting for it to happen, which sometimes takes days, sometimes takes weeks. So we just go ahead and temporarily deactivate it in our system to allow the application to proceed. Okay. So we definitely don't have that functionality right now for sure. So let's talk about that, because what you're talking about is, because right now we cannot edit federal restrictions. Right. So what you're describing is ministry user might need to be able to do that. That's functionality we have not yet built. So let's talk about that some more, because we definitely don't have that right now. Okay, so let's make a note to follow up on that one. I'm conscious of the time, so I'm going to keep moving forward if that's okay. Then there was a specific question that you had about the ECRS is often removed automatically. So at this point in time in our MVP, there's no automatic removal of provincial restrictions.
Federal restrictions will be coming in every day, and they'll adjust as they're changed at the federal level. But right now, there would have to be a manual removal of a restriction, and I think we've shown you how easy it would be, but that would be the process at this point. Certainly in the future, we can start building some of this automated, but to start with, we do not have automated removals of provincial restrictions.
Okay, that's just something we have to make sure we're incorporating in our process. I don't foresee
exactly
a massive big deal, but
okay, good catch. Any mention of the effective action? So this is what happens when there's a restriction, and this is where we have two different types of restrictions. There's a restriction and a warning, and so I'm trying to recall, Andrew, does it, because we've got our spreadsheet that folks have told us this, we know what the effect of this is, and this is a different effect. Restrictions are coming in, warnings they're coming in as restrictions as well, right? Sorry.
Yeah, so we have one more piece of the restrictions to do about what the actual effect is. I can put a note here just that as of right now, there wouldn't be a way through a UI to see what that restriction would do. So we can flag that as part of that task when we grab that.
Yeah, and we can certainly share, maybe Elena at the FO meeting, we can maybe go through that big spreadsheet that that Josh and folks have worked on, so we can kind of see and then share it so that you can see what we are telling the system to do. And then we can talk about whether that's something that should be shared as a addendum to the operations manual or something like that.
And it's also helpful if we can see what the effect is too. So current state and as fast you see a restriction, you can see what the effect is. So when you're talking to a student, like, okay, you have this federal restriction, I can see exactly what the effect of this restriction is for you. Yeah.
Okay. Well, we've tried to standardize that. So let's go through it and then you can tell us whether you think that's something that might be needed in the system in a future state, or if it's so simple now that, because it's really only one of two things. It's either suspending everything or it's doing nothing. It's just telling you. Those are the two things. A warning is just telling you, and a restriction is actually stopping everything. Those are the two things.
It might be a little bit more complex. Wade, help. Maybe you can, because you work more in the SST world, but I know like certain restrictions will mean like, okay, you're eligible for this type of funding, not this type. So it might be a little bit more detailed.
Yeah. So the current state, and actually, Nikki would speak to this better than I can, but, current state, we've got, the 700 level restriction, which still allow an application to be assessed, but will not allow disbursement to happen. 300 level restriction, which will allow an application to land. And I know that's going to be, we're talking about a different method in the new system, just for context. Will allow an application to land, but won't allow it to be even assessed. And then there are also restrictions that are specific to, like for like right now, the B3D, the BC student loan default will actually allow federal funds to go out, but not BC. Whereas the reverse, a federal default restriction won't allow anything to go out. So yeah, there's definitely some more complexity in the current state, which might be, we might need to talk about, how much of that we need. Because if I'm understanding correctly, just, what you just said, Alys, is that there's going to be, of the various different, we're breaking down to provincial and federal, but in terms of the effect, it's either everything's locked down or it's just there for an information warning.
Yeah, it sounds like we need to have a conversation about restrictions maybe with the future owners and just make sure that we're all on the same page.
You also need to include Ministry of Finance reps because they have all the B32s, B3Ds.
Yeah, they
on
have
there.
restrictions.
Yes.
Good idea. Yep.
Okay, so just as a heads up, as conscious of time, we won't get to all the questions. We do a review of them afterwards and bundle the information together. Most of them are about the restrictions type thing, so at least I'll just send you off the the notes here to review down the road. One more just about links. The link to everything mentioned will be on this board and is on this board. So if you're looking for a link, this is the board you want to look at. It is after 11. Alys, did you want to keep going through the rest of the questions? Are all restrictions, or do you want to take it away?
If there are restrictions, I suggest we bundle them and have a restrictions conversation. But I see a question about part-time assessment as well from Stephanie. Will the part-time assessment continue to assess computer allowance like it does? Though it's technically not an eligible cost.
Do you want me to explain that?
Yeah.
What's happening?
Yeah. Can you explain that?
So when SAIL was built, one of the options schools were given that you could either manually put in the costs for the courses, or you could just take a percentage of course load from your full-time institutional appendix.
Okay.
And so within the full-time institutional appendix, the book and supply also includes a computer allowance. So since SAIL has been around, if you choose that option, you're pulling in a cost that actually doesn't exist in the part-time program, assessing it. So, and it may get answered once we see how the full part-time thing works, but I just wasn't sure if that allowance is still inadvertently going to continue to assess, because that might have implications on how it appears in the EPI, but I don't fully understand the part-time. But yeah, so I just wanted it noted somewhere.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
I don't think I can answer that right now. I think I need to look at it. But thanks for flagging that. Yeah. There's another. I'm just trying to pull up, answer any questions that aren't related to the restrictions, and then we can have that conversation. So more than one calculation in part-time requires knowing the actual course load. PIR won't cover it. Student can be in the same program and be taking one or two courses. Exactly, yep, and that's with the PIR because that is app specific. So part-time applications will require a PIR, and so the institution's going to have to tell us the cost. Because like you said, it might be 42%, it might be 67%. The institution's going to have to tell us what the education cost is there. So we definitely need to get that, and we would get that through the PIR, not through, so that it's unlikely that they'll be able to add a program and an offering that's going to cover the 1001 scenarios. That's why we anticipate that app-specific PIR. The declaration page language suggested in the PIA will probably require a further. Okay, sure, sounds good. Yeah, I definitely think we need to look at it with a full-time, part-time lens. Then we had a little discussion about CASPA, and there's CASPA and there's CISPA, which are two separate things, just to make our life as conveniently easy as possible. So there's CASPA, which is the Pan-Canadian group that Stephanie is a chair for, and then there's the federal CSFA program, which is formerly known as CSLP. So sorry if I created some confusion there. Restrictions, then CSFA. Restrictions, I think the rest are restrictions. Oh, maybe just the last question, which I think would be important, and thanks for Viv for flagging this, is that, yeah, you're hearing me talk about MVP. So what happens if someone, if an application comes along that has some certain complications? Certainly, we know that we need to make sure that we can process those applications. So as much as possible, it's very likely that that's going to require that manual intervention. So ministry user might need to override a system validation or make a decision or something like that. But I've referred to it in the past as kind of getting the turn it back on the truck there, right? But we know that manually, we need to make sure that we support student applications continuing to be processed. So as much as possible, we're anticipating those. We also know there's going to be some weird things that come up, and so we might have to to figure some of those out, but that's where we're doing the best we can. So as much as possible, we need to create the manual ability for ministry users to move something along, because that's really what they do. A lot of what isn't in scope for MVP is more automation. So let's just make sure we get that, so that, and if something comes along, which I'm sure it will, something comes along on day 3 of the new system, we get an application and we didn't anticipate it, we might need to build an enhancement, and it might need to be an enhancement that goes in quite quickly, so that we can process that application. That's our last resort as well, if we need to do that. But as much as possible, we're trying to anticipate those things. So I think we've covered off all of the questions that we can for today, given timing. We need to have a conversation about restrictions. So I'm going to propose 2 things. One, we start that conversation at our future owner meeting, and then it sounds as though it might be something we need to bring back to a mod check-in to bring people back up to speed and maybe do a deeper dive into restrictions. So we'll start planning for that as well, to bring it back to you. I think for today, we are scheduled till 11:15, but I'm going to suggest that we are probably at our limits. And just thanks to everybody for the first time back in 2022. We'll see you all back in 2 weeks when we do the next demo. And if you have questions in the meantime, please reach out to myself, to the mod email, or to any of the feature owners, which are predominantly our team leads and folks like that, with any questions. Whatever we can do to share information with you, we're happy to do that. Thanks so much.
Perfect. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Have yourselves a great day.